This short video provides an introduction to podcasting. When we think about podcasting, we want to think in two kind of broad categories, the technology and then the content. I also want to say that there are many ways to approach podcasting. This is one way, my preferred way, but you may have other thoughts, other tools, other considerations, and you should feel free to explore them. But I found these tools to be relatively simple and straightforward. So this is essentially the aspects of the podcasting kind of workflow that you need to think about. So how are you going to record your podcast? How will you import that audio file, that content into some software that you can edit that podcast? Editing is obviously the next step. How do you make refinements, take things out, reorganize ideas? You have to export that content into some consumable format, most likely an MP3. Where will you post that podcast? Like, how can people access it? Should you stream it using one of the many streaming platforms available? And then finally, accessibility. I have some suggestions on how to provide captions for your podcast so that all members of your potential audience can enjoy it. Some initial considerations, the theme. What's your podcast about? Is it just a conversation among friends? Is it focused on, say, movie reviews or food? How long is your podcast? A half hour, an hour, 2 hours, however long the conversation lasts? And then finally, is it formal or informal? So a formal podcast might be something more like This American Life on NPR, as opposed to a more casual and emergent kind of podcast where it's just people having a conversation and sharing it. The structure of your podcast is really important. If your podcast has a formal structure, then that means you're going to need an intro and an outro and a specified length. You want to name your podcast. If you're going to have an intro and an outro, you want to write a script for them, so that's pretty standard. You'll introduce the host and guests if you have guests. And music under the intro and outro is really helpful in giving it a structure and a kind of more professional sound. So I'd like to go through each of these in turn, and let's start with recording and importing audio. A practical consideration for your podcast is, how will it be recorded? So will you and your potential co-host or guests all be in the same physical space, gathered around the same microphone? What if people are at a distance from each other? How will you record it and make it into a podcast? So Zoom, which I think we're all familiar with at this point, is a really good solution. So here is my Zoom page, right? Under meetings, you can see all of my meetings here. But if you go over to this left side menu, you'll find recordings. So what Zoom does is it saves the Zoom recordings in a couple of different formats. I made this practice Zoom for this particular video, and you can see that there are 3 files here. So let's click on this. And what Zoom does is it pulls out the audio. So here is the audio only. So I can just download that audio only and then upload it into some kind of editing software to shape it into a podcast. So if you want to do a panel discussion or interview a guest, you can simply invite them to a Zoom, record it, and then you have the audio of that interview or conversation. Another way to record your podcast is with a recording software. My favorite is a free open source digital audio editor and recording application called Audacity. And it works on basically any operating system. Now, I'm not a Mac user. Macs may have a built-in audio recorder and editor, which you may want to check out if you're a Mac user. But Audacity does a lot, and it's a really great tool. I've been using it for over 10 years. Let's take a look. This is the Audacity page. I found it just by Googling Audacity, audacityteam.org. And this is a place where you would download Audacity for your particular operating system. I imagine you've downloaded software before. It's very simple to do. It's safe. I've been using it for quite some time. It's not the kind of download you would need to worry about. So once you download Audacity and open it, you'll see this. This pop-up will always appear and give you information about available improvements to the software. And it also has these little videos and other kinds of guides to help you use it more effectively. So as you can probably tell, Audacity does a lot of things, But you shouldn't be intimidated because I'm a very basic user. I'm not an audio engineer. With really just a basic understanding of the tool, you can get it to do a lot of stuff. So let me guide you through some of these simple functions. So here you may recognize some of these icons. So this is the pause, play, stop, skip to start, skip to end, record, and loop. These icons are also very important. This is the selection tool, and I'll show you a little bit more about what that means as we proceed. So I'd like to record the intro to a podcast with you together. This is my sample podcast intro. It's very short. I've picked aphorisms for the name of the podcast and the name of the episode, but you can approach this task however you like. But the name of your podcast is really important. You want to give it a name and sort of conjure it into being in that way. So let's go back to Audacity and start recording. So you can see as I'm talking, this waveform appears. Let's just stop for a second and listen to that. I'm going to skip to start and press play. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. So you can see as I'm talking, this waveform appears. Let's just stop for. So that was me talking. So you can see it is actually working. If we don't like that audio, I can just X out of this track. It creates an audio track and it disappears. What I'd like to do now is record that little intro that I made. So I'm going to click record and I'm going to pop over to Microsoft Word. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host Jane Smith and I welcome you to What Reason Weaves. On this episode, The Thirst of Youth, we talk about how to make a podcast and why anyone would do such a thing. Let's go back to Audacity. Yes, that did record. So I'm going to stop recording, skip to start, and press play. So nothing's happening. You can see that nothing recorded while I was fiddling around with going to Word. So let's stop recording. And with the selection tool, right, selected, I'm going to click the mouse and see this little hand, this line appears with this little hand, right? So I'm going to just hold, click and hold, drag the little hand, and just delete that silence. So let's play it from there. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host Jane Smith and I welcome you to What Reason Weaves. On this episode, Thirst of Youth, we talk about how to make a podcast and why anyone would do such a thing. Okay, that's not bad. I don't need all this stuff after, right? It's the same procedure, just going to delete. Let's skip back to the beginning. And you'll notice these spaces of silence in between me talking. Let's go back to the beginning and play again. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host Jane Smith and I welcome you to What Reason Weaves. On this episode, Thirst of Youth. Okay, this part, I'm just going to play this part. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. We don't need that part, but while I have it, let me show you some of the things that Audacity can do. I'm going to go to Effect. Let's imagine that the volume of that selection was quite low. The other person I was interviewing over the Zoom, they were speaking very softly, or that there was a technology issue. Instead of having to get back to them, I'm going to just select Amplify. So it's going to amplify this selection. Let's click Preview. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. So that's much louder now. I like that. I can also use this slider. I don't need to know what these numbers and symbols mean. I can just use the slider to make it softer or louder. Let's do it the other way. Click Preview. That is much too low. I can't hear anything. So let's slide it back the other way and click Preview again. Or maybe that's too loud. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. I like that. Let's hit OK. And when I hit OK, I want you to notice what this waveform looks like. So you've got much bigger now. So the bigger the form, the louder it is. Let's skip to start and press play. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino. So you can hear the difference in that volume. So I can control the volume of different parts of my podcast. So if different people have different speaking volumes, or if there's some issue with their microphone, I can resolve that in the editing process. I'll show you another effect while I'm here. So I made it louder. Let's go to another effect. I'm going to change the pitch. This is kind of fun. Let's make the pitch lower. Let's preview that.
I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice.
So I can make the pitch lower. I can make the pitch higher. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. What's interesting about change pitch is that it doesn't change the speed. So I can make it just a little deeper. I'm just going to read this in my podcast voice. Oh, I like that. That sounded very good. Okay, so that's a way to use that effect. I don't know when you would use it, but theoretically, I can interview myself just by changing the pitch of the voice. So I have some options here, right? I can just delete this part of the podcast if I don't want to by just pressing the delete key. Let's see if I could just zoom in a bit. I'm going to zoom in to click on this by clicking on this plus because I want to see it a bit more. Notice that this is not a straight line. I'm going to play this. I was breathing. I don't know if you could hear that. I don't want that breathing sound. So I'm going to generate some silence. In the space where that breathing sound was, it's silent now. There's no sound. You can also see here that I'm not saying anything, but it's not silent, right? You see the difference in the thickness of those lines right here, where I didn't apply silence and where I did. So that means there's some noise. There's some background noise. I don't know what that noise is. It could be noise generated by the computer. It could be noise over my microphone. So let's go to Effect. I'll click it again and click on Noise Reduction. So I need to select some part of the audio where I think that there is noise. So let's do that. I think there might be some kind of hiss here. So I'm going to select that part. I'm going to go to Effect, Noise Reduction, Get Noise Profile. I've just showed Audacity where I think noise is. So I'm going to select all, go back to Effect, and repeat Noise Reduction. So it took any noise that I identified out of this selection. I can also delete all of these silences if I want to. Just zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. All of these silences I can take out. That'll have some effect on the flow of my speaking. Let's take all of those out. You can see that this because this is only, I think, 10 or 15 seconds long. It's actually 12 and a half seconds long, and still editing can take lots of time. So depending on the depth of the editing you want to do, the comprehensiveness of it, editing can take lots of time. So I've removed all the silences that naturally occur when I speak, and I'm going to play that back for you. Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host Jane Smith and I welcome you to What Reason Weaves. On this episode, Thirst of Youth, we talk about how to make a podcast and why anyone would do such a thing. Okay, so in my intro, it's going to be a little bit more polished and standard. It's a sort of a standard approach, right? Part of my structure. So I'm going to edit this more heavily than I would when I'm just talking the way I am with you now. So that functions pretty well for me as an intro. And I mentioned earlier that you may want sound under your podcast, some kind of audio. How would I go about finding that? Or what audio would I use? I have to be really careful because I don't want to use a popular song because of copyright implications. So I need to find some. The podcast I currently co-host, I use music that my son gave me. He's a musician, so that wasn't an issue. But there are places to find free music. So I've found this website called Pixabay, which has royalty-free music that you can use for podcasting. You can download. They also ask you to upload. You can also donate to the community if you like. You only need, as we saw, about 15 seconds worth of music. So I downloaded this very first choice, which seemed fine for our purposes. We're back in Audacity looking at our intro script that I read and recorded. So let's go. We need now to get that audio that I just downloaded, that music from Pixabay, into this Audacity file. So I showed you how to record music. Now I want to show you how to import it. Let's go to File, Import Audio. It's going to ask me, I have a folder for my sample podcast, and here you can see sample podcast music. And there it is. Here's our sample podcast music. So I can't, it's getting hard to sort of see everything. So I'm going to go to View, Track Size, Fit to Height. Okay, here are my two tracks, my sample podcast music and my audio track that I recorded. I can rename this if I want to. Change the name. I can call it Intro. Hit OK. You can see it's called Intro now. So you can see the problem, right? The music is 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and my audio track is only, I think, about 13 seconds. So I'm going to have to figure something out here. But for now, let's skip to start and hear what this sounds like. Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host James Smith and I welcome you to What Reason Leads. On this episode, right away the issue is a volume issue, right? My music is much louder. So we're going to select this track. I want to do a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to do is go to Effect and select Fade In, because I want the music to fade in slowly. So let's do that. You can see right away that music is going to fade in. I'm going to do the same thing with Effect, but this time select Fade Out. So now it's much softer. It's still too long, but it's much softer. So let's play it back again. Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host James Smith and I welcome you to What Reason Leads. On this episode, Thirst of Youth, we talk about how to make a podcast and why anyone would do such a thing. Okay, so this part is too soft to hear, so let's delete. We can also delete this far end. Why am I showing you this? Well, to work in two different tracks and organize them, and also to show you that when you're working with sound, you're working in time. When do you want your audience to hear a certain sound? So I could grab this, see the little hand? I could just grab this track and slide it over. I'm going to slide it around here. Then I'm going to start from here. Maybe I'll start from here and delete this part of my track. I'm going to select this track again, and I'm going to go to Effect and hit Fade Out. So here I faded it out again now. This is going to be really quiet, so I could probably delete this. I can move this track just a little bit over, skip to start, and let's play. Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host James Smith and I welcome you to What Reason Leads. On this episode, Thirst of Youth, we talk about how to make a podcast and why anyone would do such a thing. Okay, I think it's a little too long. I'm going to clip this off here. I'm going to push this over just a little bit and clip it off there. I think I'm happy with that now. So now this is an Audacity file. I can't do much with it, right? Except listen to it and play it in Audacity. So we talked a little bit about editing. We made decisions about what edits we wanted to make. We talked about the style and the content. You have to make decisions about if you want to edit out all the ums, the power language, like, so. You may have noticed I say so a lot. I could go into the audio and take out every time I say so, but you can probably guess that can be really tedious. You're generally not going to edit for that kind of, with that level of attention. Because once you commit to doing that with an hour of audio, that can take really almost all day. The other thing you want to be careful about is if you record an hour of audio for a 30-minute podcast, you'll have to make decisions about what stays and what goes. And if you're interviewing someone or have a guest, you most likely want to talk with them about that process and share with them the edited draft before you make it public. You don't want to really change the general idea, the thrust of what a person is trying to contribute through editing. So once you've resolved your editing, we have to think about exporting. How do I get that file out of Audacity into some consumable format? So we call that exporting. We want to export it to MP3, and we also want to save the Audacity project file. So this is an Audacity project file, right? It's what we've been working on. It doesn't have a name yet. You should save it all the time when you're editing. Save, 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 right? You're always clicking that save icon. So let's go to Save, Project. So it tells you, right, this is just for Audacity. No one else could listen to it. So let's hit OK. And it's going to ask me, what do you want to call it? We could call it, I don't know, Test Project. I'm typing with one hand because I'm holding the microphone. Let's hit Save. So now here we have Test Project. This still doesn't let others listen to it, though, because they may not have Audacity. And it's a complex data file. There's a lot of information here. So we want to export it into a consumable format. So let's go to File again, Export, Export as MP3. So let's give it a more useful name. So let's call this Episode 1. I'm going to hit Save. Your tracks will be mixed down and exported as one stereo file. Let's hit OK. Now it's going to ask me this information, which is really important for streaming. It tells the audience all kinds of information about this piece of audio, who made it, and what other pieces of audio is it connected to. So for artist name, I'm just going to put the name of our podcast, What Reason Weaves. For the track title, I think it's Episode 2. Actually, I think it's Thirst of Youth, we called it, right? I'll capitalize that. The album title would be Season 1. I mean, I'm just making this up, right? It's track number 1. The year is 2022. The genre is podcast. Let's hit OK. So it exported that as an MP3. Let's try to play that and see what it looks like. So I mentioned earlier that Audacity creates a special folder called Audacity when you download it. And there it is. Let's click it. And inside you can see our Episode 1, right, and our practice and test project. So these are Audacity files I've been playing with. Episode 1 is an MP3. You can see the different icon. So let's open it up. See what that sounds like. And there it is. And it gives us our information.
Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host Jane Smith and I welcome you to What Reason Weaves.
There you go. We've made the intro to our podcast. How does that help you? Well, if we go back and make a new project, file new, let's imagine now that this is me conducting my actual podcast, doing an interview. Yada, yada, yada. This is me doing an interview. Thank you very much. Okay, so there's my interview from my podcast, which I did in a Zoom. And I'll show you how to do that momentarily. Now, what I want to do is go to File, Import Audio. And here is my podcast intro. I need to find that, right? Go to Quick Access, Audacity. It was called Episode 1. Now I have just imported my intro. I'll fix the view so you can see it. I've just imported my intro. I can slide over the interview portion that I just did. And I have an intro and my interview. I can also do an outro at the other end. And the procedure would just be to file, export as MP3. And you're all set. We've talked about editing and exporting. The next step is hosting. How do I make my podcast available for people to hear it? There are a number of different ways to do this. Posting it on a blog or on a social media is an easy option. SoundCloud is a really good free hosting solution. So let's take a look at SoundCloud. I have a SoundCloud for my podcast twice over. I made this logo and I uploaded this image. To upload a sound file to SoundCloud, you just click upload. It's really easy to make an account and it's free. I've made use of the RSS feed for SoundCloud. It just means really simple streaming. And that means that my SoundCloud is attached to Stitcher and Spotify. So that's why I'm not going to upload the file I just made, because then it'll be on Stitcher and Spotify, and I don't want that to happen. So here is Stitcher, for example, and the most recent episode is here. I don't have to interact with Stitcher other than to make an account, which is also free. And SoundCloud pushes out my content to Stitcher so that people can listen to it on this platform. Another way to access the podcast is through Spotify. And again, I don't have to do anything with Spotify. All I need to do is make the account, connect it to SoundCloud, and Spotify will pick up that RSS feed that SoundCloud is putting out. So this is a way to get your podcast out to a broader audience if that's something you want to do. So that's called streaming. It's something you want to think about depending on if this is a student project or a personal project. You may not want to stream student projects, right? So you can just have those MP3 files and make them available in Blackboard or in the Google Drive. You don't need to use SoundCloud, Stitcher, or Spotify, or any of the many others, Podbean, for example. Okay, we've talked about recording and importing audio, whether in Zoom or Audacity, editing in Audacity, exporting to MP3, hosting in SoundCloud, streaming in Stitcher and Spotify. Now I want to talk about accessibility, how to caption your podcast. I think that's really essential. So Tunes to Tube, I don't think is especially designed for captioning, but YouTube captions. And so it's a really simple and free solution. Let's take a look at how this works. This is Tunes to Tube, tunes2tube.com. I'm just going to sign in. Well, what does Tunes to Tube do? It takes MP3s and puts them on YouTube. You just need two things to do this, an image file and an audio file. So I'm going to sign in with my Google account. It's going to ask me to allow Tunes to Tube to do this one procedure, and I'm going to allow it. What I need to do then is upload my files, a title, and a description. Luckily, I have all this already. The description I'm going to take from my intro script. I'm going to call this What Reason Weaves Episode 1. You can call it anything you like. I'm just going to put podcast here as my tag. So now I want to upload two kinds of files, audio and an image. Tunes to Tube needs both to create a video. It'll be a static image that the audio plays under. Let's click Upload Files. So I made a sample logo. I'm going to upload that. There it is. And then I'll also upload my audio. Episode 1. And then once those files are uploaded, I'll just click Create Video. The processing has completed. Let's go to YouTube. So there's my video. Here's the static image I made with my little logo and the name of my podcast. There's the data I typed into Tunes to Tube, and here we are. Now the captions are not available yet. It'll take a few minutes, maybe an hour to caption the audio file. It depends on how long it is. So we'll revisit that later in our little video. Okay, here we are back. Let's pause it. Okay, here you can see the captions have been uploaded automatically to YouTube, and as the video plays, the captions are there. This is a really good accessibility tool. So YouTube's a really good solution for captioning. It's all free, it happens automatically. Sometimes it takes about a day, depending on the length of the video, but it's pretty reliable. You can also go in there and edit those captions if you choose to. So that's it. That's my introduction to podcasting, some of the tools and considerations, and some of the workflow. I hope this is helpful to you. If you have any questions, please email me at d'agostino@fordham.edu. Thanks very much.